Welcome back, everyone, to the Elderly Confessions channel. My husband and I spent 30 million on Tet supplies. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law snuck and took it all home. My husband told me, "Forget them, you and I will go to my in-laws for Tet." The next morning, she frantically called me 50 times. On the afternoon of the 27th of Tet, after our year-end project wrap-up, Min Kwan and I left the company as dusk was falling. The year-end wind blew through the trees at the gate, cold but pleasant, carrying a feeling of both fatigue and relief after a long journey. I sat in the passenger seat, clutching the bonus envelope, feeling so dazed I could hardly believe it was real. The project we had been working on for 8 months was finally completed on schedule. We not only avoided penalties but were even praised by the board before the entire company. Our team alone received a bonus of 120 million. To outsiders, it might just be a year-end bonus, but to me, it was sweat and cold boxed meals eaten in a rush. Right there in the office, and the nights we dragged ourselves home near midnight, too exhausted to even turn on the living room lights. There were days I was so tired I would just slump onto the floor. Min Kwan would bring me cups of warm water and say, "Just hang in there a little longer, dear. When this is over, I'll take you to your parents' place for a few days to rest." And yet, it really did pass. I looked at the number in the transfer notification, and my nose suddenly stung. Min Kwan glanced at me and smiled gently while driving. "Let's have a proper Tet this year. Buy whatever you like, and I'll save the rest for our plans after the holidays." I turned to ask him, "Are you serious? Aren't you afraid I'll spend too freely?" He chuckled, "Money is earned to take care of days like these. We've worked hard all year. It would be a pity to pinch every penny during Tet." Hearing him say that, I felt my heart warm up. But to be honest, in that very moment, I wasn't thinking about dresses, cosmetics, or jewelry for myself. The first things that came to my mind were the fridge, the offerings, the gift baskets, and my mother-in-law's familiar complaints if the Tet preparations fell short. I took out my phone, opened my notes, and started making a list. I needed free-range chicken for the altar, good beef for hot pot, special sausages, tiger prawns, sea crabs, sun-dried squid, beautiful fruit for display, and high-quality sweets for guests. I also accounted for gift baskets for both sets of parents, plus a few small gifts for the close partners who supported our project. Min Kwan saw me typing away on my phone and teased that other people get a bonus and think about buying bags or dresses. His wife gets a bonus and thinks about chicken, sausage, squid, and gift wine. I gave him a playful glare, saying I had to prepare well. Otherwise, someone would say the daughter-in-law doesn't know how to take care of things come Tet. As soon as those words slipped out, the atmosphere in the car froze for a moment. Min Kwan stopped smiling, looked straight ahead, hands on the wheel, and said in a low voice, "No one will be allowed to talk to you like that this year." I was taken aback. In all my years as a daughter-in-law, whenever his mother, Mrs. Han, said something unpleasant, he usually chose silence, then later gently told me to endure it to keep the peace. I used to be angry and hurt, but I would console myself that men are often in a difficult position between their mothers and their wives. But his words that day were completely different. It wasn't just empty comfort, it sounded like a promise he had kept in his heart for a long time. That evening, we stopped by a large supermarket and made another round through a familiar food store. I chose firm chickens, trays of bright red beef, and boxes of seafood still perfectly chilled. For my mother-in-law's gift basket, I didn't take it lightly either. I picked one with tea, bird's nest, nutritious nuts, and a box of imported cookies she once praised. Even though the relationship between Mrs. Han and me was never truly comfortable, I still felt that for Tet, I should do my part first. Whether people love you or not is their business, but how you live is your own. Back home, the total of all the bills came to exactly 30 million. I carefully arranged everything on the kitchen counter, separating them into groups. I kept the groceries for us on one side, and set aside the gifts for my parents in the corner. I stuck clear notes on the gifts for both sides of the family, and put the gifts for business partners in sturdy bags to avoid confusion. Min Kwan helped me carry the boxes in, shaking his head as he worked. "You're too meticulous." I replied immediately, "Better to be meticulous than to panic when you need something. Besides, I don't want anyone saying that I got a big bonus and don't know how to act." He stopped and looked at me for a moment, then said, "Dan, you don't have to live your life trying to silence everyone else." Hearing that made my heart soften, but I just smiled it off. After being a daughter-in-law for a few years, I know some things aren't as simple as just saying a word to make it better. I've grown accustomed to preparing more than necessary and yielding more than I should, just to have a bit of peace. That night, as the fridge door clicked shut, packed with Tet food. I stood in the bright kitchen and felt my small home was unusually warm. I simply thought this year would be different. As long as the two of us were happy and we took care of both families, no one would complain, and that was enough. But I didn't know that the 30 million I had so carefully spent on Tet would become the spark that ignited the greed and vanity of my husband's family. And it was from that Tet that I finally saw who truly considered me family, and who just saw me as a warehouse they could open whenever they needed. On the morning of the 28th of Tet, I was still wiping the kitchen counter when my phone rang. Seeing "mother-in-law" on the screen, for some reason, my hand paused for a beat. Usually, Mrs. Han rarely calls me at this hour. If there's something important, she usually calls Min Kwan directly. When she calls me, it's mostly to remind me to buy this, prepare that, or ask a question that I know has a hidden meaning. I answered the phone, trying to keep my voice gentle. "Yes, I'm listening, mother." On the other end, Mrs. Han's voice sounded sweeter than usual. "Dan, I heard from Kwan yesterday that you two got a project bonus, is that right? I'm so happy for you both. This morning, Mom and Thou Mi stopped by for a moment to see how we were prepping for Tet. Just hearing Thou Mi's name made my heart sink a little. My sister-in-law isn't a bad person in a loud way, but she has a very annoying way of being clever. Whatever she likes of someone else's, she doesn't ask for it directly. She just sighs a few times so they feel guilty enough to offer it. Even though I wasn't comfortable, I tidied up the living room, brewed a pot of lotus tea, and set a small plate of candied fruit on the table. Min Kwan was in his office at the time, taking the chance to handle a few year-end emails. I didn't want to make the atmosphere in the house heavy just because of a small gut feeling. After all, it's the 28th of Tet. My mother-in-law is visiting, so as a daughter-in-law, I should be perfectly polite. At a little past 9, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and saw Mrs. Han standing there in a plum-colored wool coat, hair neatly curled, and next to her was Thou Mi in a tight-fitting knit dress with bright red lipstick. She was only holding a small bag of oranges, but she had a very bright smile on her face. "Mom brought some oranges over for you two to have for good luck. Your house probably lacks nothing, but it's a small gift with big intentions." I quickly took the bag of oranges from her. "Yes, please come in and have some tea, Mom, and Mi." Thou Mi was changing her slippers while scanning the living room with her eyes. She laughed, her tone half complimentary, half jealous. "Your place is always so clean. You can tell you're well off. My place at the end of the year is a mess, and I'm always scrambling for money." Quote. I just smiled without giving a deep response. I was already used to those kinds of opening remarks. It's like someone dropping a small stone into the water, waiting to see how far the ripples will spread. Before she had even settled into her seat, Mrs. Han stood up and headed toward the kitchen, saying, "Let me see how you've been shopping. Well, you two got a big bonus this year, so this Tet must be quite abundant." I followed behind, feeling slightly uneasy but keeping a calm expression. As soon as the fridge was opened, Thou Mi's eyes immediately went wide. She leaned in close to look at every shelf, drawing out her words. "Oh my, Dan, you bought so much? Shrimp, crab, beef, sausage, and even imported fruit." Quote. "It must be nice to have a bonus. You don't even have to think twice about what you buy." Mrs. Han sighed softly upon hearing that, but clearly intended for me to hear it. She opened the freezer, looked at the seafood boxes, and said, "You two are so well off, while Kiet's family will likely have to scrape by this year. Business is tough at the end of the year, clients want gifts, and partners need to be kept happy, but there's barely a cent in their pockets." I just gave a faint smile in response. Tuan Kiet, Min Kwan's younger brother, complains about being broke every year, yet he upgrades his phone the moment a new one comes out. Thou Mi was showing off a new handbag online just last month and never misses a chance to post photos when dining out. Their hardship usually only surfaces when they need someone else to foot the bill. Thou Mi stood next to me and suddenly lowered her voice. "Dan, I'm hesitant to bring this up, but Kiet really needs some decent gift sets for his partners. If they're happy at the start of the year, business will go smoothly, but if we lose this contract, our Tet won't be peaceful either." She glanced over at the fruit baskets I had set aside in the corner of the kitchen, her gaze lingering longer than usual. I knew right away the real purpose of this visit wasn't to see how I was preparing for Tet. Mrs. Han immediately chimed in, "You're all siblings. The well-off should help the ones in need. You have so many Tet supplies here, it wouldn't hurt to give away a little. Besides, you got a 120 million bonus, you can just buy more in no time. If Kiet loses his business deal, his wife and children will suffer." I placed my hand on the refrigerator door, but before I could say anything, Min Kwan walked out of his office. Perhaps he had overheard the end of our conversation. He stood at the kitchen door, his voice not loud but very clear. "Mom, if you need something, Just say it directly. But my wife and I have already made plans for these things. Mrs. Han spun around instantly, the smile on her lips vanishing completely. I only said a few words, and you're already acting so tense. It's not like I'm asking for myself. I'm just looking out for your brother. Min Kwan remained calm. I know you care about KIET, but helping means using honest money and doing the right thing. No one is to take Dan's things to satisfy someone else's pride. That statement left the whole kitchen completely silent. Thou Mi lowered her head, twisting her hands together, whispering, Kwan, don't say that, it's embarrassing. I just thought we were family and should look out for each other. I wouldn't dare take anything from you. Quote. I looked at her, saying nothing. That look of self-pity would probably make an outsider feel sorry for her. But I knew her all too well. Mrs. Han could not stand her son speaking so bluntly in front of his wife and sister-in-law. She slammed her handbag onto the table, her voice choking with anger. I never thought that after getting married, you'd become so calculating with your own mother and sister. In the past, whatever good food this house had, I always saved for you. Now that you have a little bonus, you're afraid I'll take it. Min Kwan let out a breath, trying to suppress his anger. I'm not afraid of you taking it. I'm just afraid you think taking from us is a given. Mrs. Han froze for a few seconds, then gave a cold laugh. Fine, I understand now. From now on, I won't dare to bother your family again. Quote, having a son is just like having none at all. After saying that, she pulled Dao Mi by the hand and headed straight for the door. Before stepping out, she turned back to look at me, her gaze sharp as a knife. You're very clever, Dan. Clever enough to make your husband forget who his own mother is. The door slammed shut, leaving a heavy silence in the house. I stood in the kitchen full of Tet supplies, but my heart felt no joy at all. Min Kwan walked over to me, his voice soft, don't take it to heart. I looked at him and smiled faintly. I'm just afraid she won't stop here. He was silent for a few seconds, then said, if she wants to test the boundaries again, this time I won't let you stand alone. At that moment, I only thought he was trying to comfort me. I never expected that Mrs. Han and Dao Mi had actually planned a move far more outrageous. On the afternoon of the 29th of Tet, I took the opportunity to stop by the company one last time to finish up the remaining project documents. The office was emptier than usual, with only a few people sitting quietly in front of their computer screens, everyone wanting to finish work to make it home in time for Tet. I signed the last file, sent a confirmation email to the finance department, and finally breathed a sigh of relief. Min Kwan texted to say he had to meet his manager to discuss some supplementary inspections and might be about half an hour late. On the way back to the apartment, I stopped to buy a bouquet of red gladiolus. I thought I'd put them on the altar tomorrow for a festive look, then we'd visit his parents briefly before heading to my family's. Even though Mrs. Han left in a huff yesterday, I told myself it was Tet, after all. Whatever can be overlooked, I'll overlook, as long as she doesn't overstep our boundaries again. I didn't want to cause trouble, but strangely, the closer I got to the door, the more anxious I felt. A vague sensation, like a thin thread pulled taut in my chest. The apartment door was locked as usual, the electronic lock showed no errors, and there were no signs of tampering on the handle. I set the flowers on the shelf, changed into my slippers, and stepped inside. The living room was still tidy, and the curtains were neatly tied back. My morning coffee mug was still on the tea table, but for some reason, the house felt unusually cold. It wasn't the chill of the air conditioning, but a sense of emptiness, as if someone had rummaged through everything and then intentionally tidied up. I went straight to the kitchen, and as soon as I pulled the fridge door open, my whole body froze. It was almost completely empty. The trays of fresh red beef I'd placed on the middle shelf were gone, and the ceremonial chicken had vanished too. The sealed boxes of seafood, the crab, tiger prawns, and sun-dried squid, were all wiped clean as if they'd never existed. I opened the freezer, letting a cloud of cold air escape, but inside there were only a few stray ice cubes and a flattened bag of scallions in the corner. The feeling at that moment was as if someone had sucked all the air out of my lungs. I couldn't believe my eyes and rushed to open the pantry. The high-quality jam boxes, bags of nuts, tea, and the bird's nest gift basket for my mother-in-law were all gone. I turned to the corner of the kitchen where I'd set aside the fruit for my partner. That spot was empty too. Even the bottles of wine wrapped in gold paper had disappeared. Every single item I carefully selected, noted, and organized all last night has been wiped clean, not even leaving a single box of cookies. I stood still in the middle of the kitchen for a long time. The first thing that crossed my mind wasn't a burglary, because the money in the drawer was still there. The laptop on the desk was untouched, and Min Kwan's watch in the bedroom hadn't gone missing either. Whoever took the items knew exactly what they wanted and didn't touch anything else. I walked slowly to the dining table. Then I saw a small note placed under the salt shaker. Ms. Han's handwriting slanted, hurried, yet full of indifference. I picked it up to read. Mom and I took the items for Kiet's family to use first. You have your bonus, you can buy more anytime. Your brother needs them for his partners, don't make a scene. Just a few lines, but my vision went dark. Not a word of inquiry, not a request for permission, not a hint of remorse. It was as if this house were her storeroom, and Min Kwan and I were just people shopping on her behalf. The phrase, buy more anytime, stung my heart more than the 30 million dong. So it turns out our efforts and my preparations were, in her eyes, as trivial as something that could be redone at any moment. My hands shook so much that the paper rustled. I set it down on the table and opened the doorbell camera app on my phone. The recording from shortly after 2 p.m. appeared very clearly. Ms. Han stood at the door, entering the secondary code Min Kwan had set for her in case of emergencies. Following her was Thou Mi, carrying a large roll of plastic bags. The two of them were inside for less than 40 minutes, then proceeded to pull out 3 large bags, a white foam box, and several fruit baskets. Thou Mi was even carrying a wine basket, laughing as she walked, saying something to Ms. Han, looking as thrilled as if she'd just struck gold. Watching that, my throat tightened. I wanted to call Ms. Han right away, to ask her what she thinks of me and her own son, to be able to brazenly walk into someone else's house and clean them out like that. I also wanted to call Thou Mi to ask if she has any shame left, after pretending to be shy this morning, only to follow my mother-in-law here in the afternoon to haul everything home. But just as I tapped on my contacts, the front door swung open. Min Kwan had arrived. He saw me standing in the kitchen, looking at the wide-open fridge, then at the note on the table. He didn't ask much. Just a few seconds later, his expression turned cold. I thought he would sigh, say he'd call his mother, or worse, tell me to endure it once more for the sake of peace. But he didn't do that. He picked up the note, read it, and set it down very slowly, as if suppressing an anger that, if unleashed, could not be reined back in. My voice choked up. It's not about the money, Kwan. 30 million is lost, but it can be earned back. But I can't stand them treating our house like a warehouse. They enter when they want, take what they want, and then leave a note like they're doing us a favor. Quote, at that point, my eyes stung. I had tried to stay strong from the moment I opened the fridge until now, but in front of my husband, a sense of resentment welled up, uncontrollable. Min Kwan stepped forward and placed his hand on my shoulder. His hand was warm, but his voice was strangely calm. He said, let them be. We will go to my parents' house for Tet. My bonus is still there. We'll buy what we need, and I'll handle the rest. I looked up at him, hardly believing my own ears. Aren't you going to your mother's? He shook his head. No, the people in the wrong are waiting for us to go argue so they can paint us as disrespectful. I won't give them that chance. I stood there in silence. Min Kwan's composure at that moment surprised me more than the fact that our Tet supplies were taken. In the empty kitchen, for the first time, I didn't feel alone. But I also understood that when a man who has always been patient like my husband reaches this level of silence, what follows will surely not end with just a few bags of stolen Tet groceries. That evening, our kitchen was so empty that I could even hear the steady hum of the air conditioner in the living room. In years past, I probably would have rushed to call my mother-in-law, argued through tears, and ended up both resentful and forced to buy everything back myself just to save face for Tet. But this time, Min Kwan didn't let me do that. He closed the fridge, picked up the gladiolus bouquet I'd bought, placed it in a vase, and said calmly, go pack a few clothes. We're leaving for my in-laws' house early tomorrow morning. I looked up at him, still completely stunned. What about your family? Min Kwan didn't answer immediately. He grabbed the file folder from the shelf, gathering the receipts, camera snapshots, and the note Ms. Han left, putting them all in one place. A moment later, he said, if someone wants to play the victim, let them, but if they use our things to bribe partners, it's no longer just a family matter. His voice wasn't loud or harsh, but every word fell clearly, as if it had been weighed for a long time. I stood still for a few seconds and asked, what do you mean? What does Tet stuff have to do with work? Min Kwan pulled out a chair for me to sit at the dining table. He looked at his mother's note, his gaze turning somber. Do you remember me telling you that Kiet's company is a sub-supplier for part of our project materials? I was slightly taken aback. It was true that I'd heard him mention it before, but only in passing, like a trivial detail. I wasn't in charge of procurement, so I didn't pay much attention. Min Kwan continued. Kiet's side has been warned many times. Late deliveries, missing documents, and quotes with some unusually high costs. I've respected my mother and our family ties, so I downplayed the reports. But it seems that leniency made him think he could do whatever he wanted. I felt a chill run down my spine as I listened. It turned out the story wasn't just about my mother-in-law and sister-in-law getting greedy over nice things. If those fruit baskets were actually being used to bribe someone involved in the inspection, it was no longer just about taking things from our house. It could become a trap that drags both my husband and me into serious trouble. I whispered, "Do you think Kiet intends to use those gifts to butter up the inspection team?" Min Kwan nodded. He wouldn't jump to conclusions without proof, but he knew Kiet's character. He would never need fruit so urgently unless there was something stuck behind the scenes. He picked up his phone and dialed someone named Phuoc. From the way he spoke, I guessed it was someone from the project's legal department. Min Kwan didn't dwell on family matters or use emotional language. He stated briefly, "Phuoc, I need your help getting the list of gifts, inspection schedules, subcontracts, and payment installments related to Kiet's side over the last 3 months, especially the expenses incurred near Tet. If there's anything unusual, send it to me privately first." The person on the other end was silent for a moment, then replied something. Min Kwan only added, "Yes, I take full responsibility for this request. No more handling things based on personal relationships." I looked at my husband, seeing a very different side of him for the first time. He was no longer the son who sighed whenever his mother cried, nor the husband trying to mediate between us, but a man who had decided that whoever crossed the line must be held accountable. His earlier promise to leave it to him wasn't just to put my mind at ease. It was a clear line drawn to separate family ties from exploitation. That night, Min Kwan's phone lit up 3 times, and all 3 calls were from Mrs. Han. He looked at the screen and then turned the phone face down on the table. He didn't answer. I asked, "Aren't you afraid your mother will be angry?" He curled his lips into a faint, detached smile. "Just because Mom is angry that I won't let her scold me doesn't mean I'm in the wrong." A moment later, my phone vibrated, and a message from Thou Mi popped up. "Dan, I know you're angry, but don't be so petty. We use those things for work. When we're better off later, we won't forget what you and your husband have done for us." I read it and just found it laughable. They take things without asking and then turn around to call others petty. Indeed, only someone too used to being spoiled could say such a thing. I showed the phone to Min Kwan. He didn't tell me to reply, just to take a screenshot. From now on, everything must have evidence. Don't rely on words with people who habitually twist the truth. I did as he said. I took screenshots of the messages, saved the camera footage, photographed Mrs. Han's note, and put the receipts in a folder. Each of those small actions made me feel gradually calmer. Perhaps for all these years, my exhaustion didn't stem from not knowing right from wrong, but from having no one to stand by me and defend the truth whenever it was distorted. Nearly 11 p.m., Min Kwan opened the smart lock app and deleted the secondary code previously given to Mrs. Han. He set a new password, turned on access notifications, then turned to me and said, "From today on, no one can enter our home without permission, not even my mother." I stared at him for a long time. If I had heard that on any other day, I might have found it heavy, but after what just happened, it made me feel respected. After that, he ordered a few simple gift baskets to take to my parents' house tomorrow morning. Nothing expensive, nothing flashy. Just some tea, cakes, fruit, and a few specialties my parents like. I asked about his side of the family. Min Kwan closed his phone screen and replied concisely, "His family has already taken what they wanted." I didn't say anything more. On the balcony, the year-end wind slipped through the door gap, biting and cold, but inside, my heart finally calmed down. For the first time, my husband did not choose to appease his mother through his wife's sacrifice. He quietly struck at the very thing Mrs. Han and Tuan Kiet fear most: money, contracts, and the pride they always try to maintain at the expense of others' efforts. On the morning of the 30th of Tet, while it was still foggy, Min Kwan and I packed a few simple bags of fruit into the trunk. No more expensive gift baskets, no more overflowing crates of seafood like in the original plan, just some good cakes, a few boxes of tea my father likes, and some bags of fruit my mother usually buys at year's end. Yet, when I saw Min Kwan carefully tying up each bag, my heart felt much lighter than it did last night. At least this time, I didn't have to carry the bitterness alone and tell myself to endure it for the sake of peace. The car rolled out of the apartment complex while the streets were still empty. Along both sides of the road, a few late-season flower stalls still had their lights on. The vendors sat huddled beside pots of chrysanthemums. A few kumquat trees remained. I looked out the window, still heavy-hearted from the feeling of having my own in-laws casually walk into my home and take everything. But beside me, Min Kwan sat silently driving, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my hand. He didn't say much, but that simple gesture was enough to make me understand I wouldn't be abandoned like in previous years. My parents' house is over an hour's drive from the city. Just as I reached the alley entrance, I saw smoke rising from the backyard. I caught faint scents of phrynium leaves, fried shallots, and familiar fresh sticky rice. My mother was picking vegetables on the porch. Seeing the car stop, she quickly stood up and wiped her hands on her apron. My father stepped out from the house, still holding a bamboo-splitting knife in his hand. He looked at both of us, then studied my expression. He didn't ask right away, just saying, "You're back? Go inside and wash up, breakfast is still hot." Quote. The way my parents didn't bombard me with questions made my throat tighten. There are some people who don't need you to tell them. They just know their child has just been through something unpleasant. That morning's meal was very simple, with just a plate of fried spring rolls, a bowl of bamboo shoot soup, some pickled onions, and a pot of freshly cooked rice. But for some reason, I found it more delicious than any banquet. Min Kwan sat beside me, politely serving food to my parents. My mother looked at him, her gaze a bit probing but softer than usual. Only after eating did I recount everything. I told them about when Mrs. Han and now I came over to see our Tet decorations, and their half-complaining, half-probing remarks. Then about how the next afternoon they used the secondary code to enter the house and clear everything out. I even mentioned the note Mrs. Han left saying we had bonuses to buy more, and how Min Kwan cancelled the door code and decided to bring me to my parents' home. My father didn't get angry immediately after hearing it. He set his teacup down and stayed silent for a long time, long enough that I could clearly hear the bubbling of the water pot in the kitchen. Finally, my father said in a deep but firm voice, "If family members take from each other without permission, it's no longer love, it's disrespect. Poverty can be excused, but greed hidden behind the guise of family cannot be defended." Quote. Those words made my eyes sting. My mother sighed. Holding my hand, she said, "Don't regret the 30 million. Money lost can be earned back. What you need to look at isn't the pile of stuff, but your husband's attitude when you were treated that way." Min Kwan set his glass down and sat up straight in front of my parents. He said very clearly, "I apologize because in the past there were things I left Dan to face alone. This time, I will not let her stand alone anymore. I will resolve this family matter to the very end. But I don't want to involve you in my troubles during Tet." My mother's eyes reddened when she heard that. She used to be unhappy with Min Kwan. Not because he was a bad person, but because she'd often see me suffer in silence at his family's home while he said nothing. Today, at least he said what she had been waiting a long time to hear. Near noon, the whole family started cleaning leaves and washing rice to wrap the final batch of cakes. I sat next to my mother, wiping each phrynium leaf, while Min Kwan helped my father split bamboo strings on the porch. That simple atmosphere calmed my heart. But right at that moment, my phone lit up. An acquaintance sent me a screenshot of Thou Me's post. She had taken a photo of the gifts, seafood, and liquor I had bought, covering the entire living room table at the main house. The caption was written very sweetly. "Our first Tet together, we prepared gifts ourselves to thank our partners, hoping for a prosperous and successful new year." I looked at the photo and let out a cold laugh, laughing because I was so frustrated I didn't know how else to react. The things Min Kwan and I paid for, the items I personally selected, had now become Thou Me's hard work in just one post. A few minutes later, Mrs. Han also commented, "My youngest daughter-in-law is so capable, knowing how to take care of her husband and manage the family. That's how a woman should be." I handed my phone to Min Kwan to see. He just took one look, his eyes darkening as he said, "Even better. They've posted the evidence online themselves." Before I could ask more, Min Kwan's phone pinged with a new email. It was Mr. Phuoc sending the preliminary summary file. Min Kwan opened it quickly, his expression growing more serious by the second. I glanced at a few lines and saw mentions of the acceptance schedule, a list of gifts, and some unusual exchanges between Tuan Kiet's side and the project's assistant manager. Min Kwan locked the screen, not wanting to go into details in front of my parents. He just looked at me and said in a low voice, "My mother will probably call you a lot tomorrow morning, but this time, it won't be to scold you." I looked at him, feeling both nervous and cold. Outside in the yard, my father was still splitting strings, my mother was still washing leaves, and the kitchen smoke rose as gently as it did every other Tet. But I know that on the other side, Han and now I are still happily thinking they've won big. They think taking my things preserves their pride, thinking a few boastful photos can turn someone else's work into their own success. Little do they know that very glee is the first trail leading to a storm that none of them will be able to handle by the next morning. On the first morning of the new year, I woke up to the sound of roosters and my mother bustling about in the yard. The weather was chilly, with dew still clinging to the banana leaves in the back garden. The atmosphere was so clear and peaceful that it made one want to forget all the unpleasantness of the day before. I put on a sweater and went out to help my mother with the 7 New Year's offerings. My mother placed a plate of sticky rice on the tray and said, "It's a new year, leave what isn't worth it behind. As long as your heart is honest, that's enough." I nodded, thinking that at least that morning, I would have some peace. But as soon as I finished arranging the flowers on the altar, my phone in my pocket started vibrating. At first, I thought it was just a Tet greeting message. I took it out and saw Han's name on the screen. 1 call, 2 calls, then 3 in a row. I looked over at Min Kwan, who was standing on the porch talking to my father. His phone was also lighting up incessantly. Before I could answer, my screen showed calls from Thou Mi and then Tuan Kiet. It was as if the whole paternal side of the family was being held at knife point and could only call us. I didn't answer right away. It wasn't because I was playing hard to get, but because after what happened yesterday, I knew I shouldn't rush into any more emotional traps. In less than an hour, my phone showed exactly 50 missed calls from Han. Messages poured in as well, each one more frantic than the last. "Dan, answer the phone now. Something big has happened, tell Kwan to stop it." Then came a line that made my hand freeze. "Do you want this whole family to die before you're satisfied?" I hadn't even grasped what was happening when Min Kwan walked in and showed me his phone. On the screen was an internal email sent at dawn. The subject line was short but enough to make my heart race. A notice to suspend all payment files for suppliers managed by Tuan Kiet. The reason clearly stated signs of violating regulations regarding gifts to partners, requiring review before proceeding with acceptance and disbursement. I stared at every word, a cold shiver running down my spine. The story of those few stolen Tet gift bags had finally hit exactly where Min Kwan suspected. He said slowly, "Last night Mi took the baskets stolen from our house to gift the head of the auxiliary acceptance team, but she live streamed it." I looked up, stunned. "Live streamed?" Min Kwan smiled faintly, a smile without a hint of joy. "Yeah, she wanted to show off that she and Kiet know how to handle relationships and treat partners well." The clip even revealed the company logo on the document bag next to the table, the project name on the envelope, and she even named the recipient. I could only listen in silence. Some people are so greedy that they don't just want to take from others, they want the whole world to applaud their generosity. It turns out while my family was gathered around the Bon Chung pot on New Year's Eve, Thou Mi was displaying the very items I bought on a banquet table, smiling brightly at the camera, saying that at the start of the year one must show gratitude to those who helped, as the gift matters less than the heart. It's just a pity that heart bore the seal of the shop I ordered from, the receipt I kept, and the evidence captured by my home security camera. A staff member happened to see the clip, recognized the person named as the one in charge of auxiliary acceptance, and immediately took screenshots to send to the internal control board. Min Kwan didn't elaborate on the data he sent last night, but I understood it made it impossible to dismiss this as just a holiday social gesture. Tuan Kiet's side already had late submissions and abnormal price quotes. Now with this public gift clip, it's like they've stamped their own downfall. Overnight, the gift baskets taken from my house turned into an investigation into bribery, and the most panicked people are none other than those who thought they had just won. My phone vibrated again. This time it was a video call from Mrs. Han. I looked at Min Kwan. He nodded and answered it himself. Mrs. Han's face appeared on screen, her hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot as if she had been crying all night. As soon as she saw us, she started shouting, "Kwan, what have you done to your brother? It's Tet, and you're driving him into a corner? Tell the company to retract it, I'm begging you." Min Kwan stared at his mother silently for a few seconds, making Mrs. Han even more flustered. She turned to me, "Dan. I know I was hot-headed yesterday and I took your things, but that's nothing worth fussing over. Tell your husband to spare Kiet. If he loses this contract, his family is finished." When I heard, "That's nothing worth fussing over," my heart suddenly went cold. Even now, what she fears isn't that she was wrong, but that Tuan Kiet has to pay the price. Min Kwan held the phone, his voice dropping, "Mom, no one is killing him. He dug his own grave." Mrs. Han froze, then burst into louder sobs. "He is your own brother. If you don't love him, Who will? He replied very softly, but each word felt like a nail being driven in. I have loved him for years. It's precisely because everyone loved him the wrong way that he thought he could just take from others, thinking breaking the law and bribing people is normal. Mrs. Han couldn't speak anymore, only buried her face in her hands and cried. Thou am I cut in from behind, her voice trembling but still trying to cast blame. You two just need to say one word and the company will let it slide. Why take it this far? I just wanted to help my husband keep his job. This time I looked straight into the screen, saying my first words since the morning. If you want to keep a job, do it the right way, not by stealing from others to buy shortcuts. Thou am I was left speechless, and Mrs. Han looked at me as if I had just cut her last remaining lifeline. The call ended with the choked sobs of my mother-in-law. I placed the phone on the table, looking at the New Year's offering tray still wreathed in incense smoke, my heart feeling heavy. The first morning of the year should be a time to wish each other peace, yet because of greed and pride, everything has turned into a storm. But this time, I am no longer the one standing in an empty kitchen wondering what I did wrong. I know very well that this storm was not created by me. It is simply returning to the very place where it began. After that morning call, I thought Mrs. Han would stay quiet for a while to find a way to resolve Tuan Kiet's situation, but I had underestimated the bitterness of someone used to using tears to twist right and wrong. Just a few hours later, while I was helping Mom wash dishes after the New Year meal, my phone kept ringing. This time it wasn't Mrs. Han, but aunts and uncles from my husband's side, the very people who rarely even checked in on me all year long. The first person to call was Aunt Feng, my father-in-law's cousin. As soon as I answered, I heard her harsh voice, Dan. People avoid doing heartless things during Tet. Your brother-in-law is struggling. Just overlook it since he took a few fruit baskets. Why let your husband cause him to lose his contract? Before I could explain, she continued, you have a big bonus now, live with some integrity, don't break up your husband's family over a few pennies. I held the phone, feeling both amused and bitter. They didn't know the truth, yet they scolded me in a tone as if they had been sitting in my house witnessing everything. Then came Aunt Lean, Uncle Mao, and a few distant relatives, each saying something different but all meaning the same thing. I was selfish, I was calculating, I was goading Min Quan to harm his younger brother. Mrs. Han had clearly taken the first step. She told the whole family that I made a big deal out of a few Tet gift baskets, causing the company to suspect Tuan Kiet and putting my sister-in-law's family at risk of losing a contract early in the year. In her story, I turned into a woman with money but no sense of decency, and Tuan Kiet and Thou Am I were the pathetic young couple being bullied by their sister-in-law. By the afternoon, Thou Am I posted a status update on social media. She didn't mention my name, but anyone who knew us understood who she was talking about. Wealthy people aren't necessarily kind-hearted. There are those who act moral on the outside, but when they see their brother-in-law in trouble, they kick him while he's down. Starting the year with misfortune, I just hope heaven is watching. Under the post, several people offered comfort and asked what happened. Thou Am I answered vaguely, I don't want to say too much, after all, we are family, but some things hurt, especially when I once considered them a sister. I read that and let out a cold laugh. Consider me a sister? Someone who considers me a sister wouldn't use the entry code with my mother-in-law to raid my home and take all my Tet supplies. Someone who considers me a sister wouldn't take my things, post them online, and brag about them as their own hard work. But for those used to playing the victim, the truth is never as important as telling the story in a way that makes them seem the most pitiful. A few relatives began commenting in agreement. It really is easy for money to change one's personality. These days, family ties are cheaper than Tet gifts. If you're a daughter-in-law who doesn't love your husband's family, it's hard to last long. My mother saw my expression change and placed a hand on my shoulder. Don't rush to respond. The upright don't fear a bad reputation, but the upright must also know how to keep evidence. I nodded, and just as I was about to show my phone to Min Quan, someone unexpectedly sent me a link. It was a post in my apartment complex's resident group. An anonymous account had just posted a hallway security camera clip with a brief caption. On the first morning of Tet, may I ask, is this borrowing, or just helping yourself to someone else's property? I clicked to watch it, my heart pounding. The clip clearly showed Ms. Han and Thou Am I using the secondary code to open my door, then dragging out 3 large bags, a foam box, and several gift baskets. It didn't stop there. Below were screenshots of Thou Mi's post showing off the gifts, placed next to my purchase receipt with the date and my name. Even though the poster had covered some private information, anyone who knew them would recognize the situation clearly. I turned to Min Quan, who looked at the screen and frowned. It wasn't Dang. And I know it wasn't you. Perhaps some resident in the building, after seeing Thou Am I spinning lies online, couldn't hold back anymore. In less than half an hour, The post spread faster than I expected, and the comments shifted dramatically. Someone wrote, "Taking your sister-in-law's things to give to your partners and then going online to play the victim? That's truly shameless." Quote. Another said, "Stealing isn't as scary as stealing and then forcing the owner to be grateful." Some even took screenshots of Thou Me's suggestive status and placed them next to the camera clip to mock her. The rich aren't necessarily compassionate, but the greedy certainly have plenty of excuses. Those comments were like slaps in the face to the people who had just been so eager to blame me. I frantically deleted the post, but it was already too late. Screenshots were being shared everywhere. Those who had just been sympathizing with her started to ask, "Wait, so that stuff really belonged to your sister-in-law? Why did you take it without asking?" It's dangerous to give a gift to a partner with an origin like that. I didn't feel smug, just found life to be quite strange. When I said I was being treated unfairly, nobody wanted to listen. But when the camera spoke up, everything suddenly became clear. My phone rang again. This time it was Mrs. Han. As soon as I answered, before I could say a word, she hissed, "Was it you who leaked the clip? Do you want this family destroyed to be satisfied?" Her voice no longer had the pleading tone from the morning, but was filled with bitterness. I had just opened my mouth to reply when Min Kwan took the phone. He turned on the speakerphone and said very slowly, "Mom, people who do bad things should fear cameras from the start, not wait until they're exposed to blame others." The other end went silent for a few seconds, then Mrs. Han burst into tears. But this time, her crying no longer softened my heart. She choked out, "You're ruining your own brother for this woman. She's your wife, but Kit is your own flesh and blood." Min Kwan glanced at me for a moment and replied, word for word, "No, it was you who ruined him. Because you taught him that taking other people's things is normal. You taught him wrong and then made the whole family pay for it." After that sentence, Mrs. Han hung up. My grandmother's house returned to silence, but I knew this was no longer about reproachful calls or vague status updates. My reputation had been dragged out before our relatives and on social media, and my husband's family, unable to play the victim, would surely find a way to retaliate more aggressively. From that moment on, the conflict was no longer about the Tet gift being cleaned out. It had become a war over who had the right to speak the truth. I hadn't guessed wrong. When they could no longer continue crying and pleading, my husband's family immediately changed their tone. First came the accusatory phone calls, then some insinuations online. Then on the afternoon of the second day of Tet, Tuan Kit officially made his move. He didn't choose to remain silent while waiting for the company audit, nor did he think of explaining things clearly. A man like him, once used to taking shortcuts, only knows how to find a dirtier path to run when his way is blocked. Rumors began to spread among the project's partners. At first, it was just whispers, saying that the bribery scandal wasn't the suppliers doing alone. Then gradually, Min Kwan's name was dragged into it. Someone messaged my husband privately, in a tone both probing and warning. "Kwan, since we know each other, I'll be honest. Word is going around that you were the one who took the bribe, and once exposed, you pushed all the blame onto Kit." Quote. Min Kwan read the message, his expression unchanged, but I saw his fingers linger on the screen for a long time. Tuan Kit didn't just spread rumors. He sent some people edited photos, including images of Min Kwan standing with partners at the year-end acceptance meeting. The photos were perfectly ordinary, but through his narrative, they became proof that my husband had close ties to the bribe takers. He told one person that Min Kwan wanted to steal credit for the project, and told another that we were trying to kick his unit out of the supply chain to bring in our own people. His tongue is so slick that anyone unaware of the full story would easily think he is the victim. Min Kwan put his phone on the table and said very quietly, "He's started to bite back." I asked, "Do you need to call Phuoc right away?" He shook his head, "Not yet, let him say more. The more a person lies, the more trails they leave behind." He made a chill run down my spine. I knew he was trying to stay calm, but I also understood that this time, Tuan Kit didn't just want to save himself. He wanted to drag us into the mud so that if he couldn't escape, we wouldn't have peace either. By around 4 p.m., things got even worse. An anonymous account posted in a fairly large community group. The headline was sensational. Project coordinator embezzles bonuses, forcing subcontractors to offer kickbacks for the Tet holiday. I read only that far and felt my heart sink. The post didn't state my full name, but it featured a photo of me at the company year-end party with a very sloppy attempt to hide my face. The company name, project name, and some internal details were written just vaguely enough for acquaintances to recognize. The post falsely claimed that I used my close ties with management to force subcontractors to give gifts if they wanted to be paid on time. They also wrote that my husband and I receive huge bonuses but are still greedy, pocketing company money while demanding personal kickbacks from below. There was one passage that made me shake with anger. A person who acts gentle on the outside and plays the victimized daughter-in-law at home, but leaves no room for others to survive at work. Those words were so venomous that I had to read them twice to believe someone would dare to lie so blatantly. My mother was the next person after me to see the post. She was pouring tea for my father, her hand suddenly shaking and spilling hot water onto the table. "Dan, is this about you?" My mother's voice went hoarse. My father took the phone to read it, his face turning red with fury. He slammed his hand on the table, making the teacup bounce with a sharp clatter. It wasn't enough for them to take our family's belongings. Now they are dragging my daughter's honor through the mud. I quickly grabbed my father's hand, afraid his blood pressure would spike, but I was shaking myself. What hurt even more was that a few colleagues started messaging me. One person gently asked, "Dan, what is this story on the internet about? Is someone trying to harm you?" But others sent only blunt, short questions. "Is it true?" Another person just took a screenshot of the post and sent it straight to me. Why is the internet saying such awful things? I looked at each message, feeling my throat tighten up. Just the other day, I was standing on stage receiving praise for completing the project on time. Yet, after just one nasty post, all my efforts were suddenly covered in filth. I tried to appear calm in front of my parents, but by evening, I couldn't take it anymore. When the whole family went inside to prepare dinner, I sat alone on the back porch, and the tears just kept falling. I didn't cry for fear of losing money, nor did I cry because of the insults from strangers. I cried because of the feeling of helplessness when my honor is being trampled upon by others. While the initial wrongdoing was clearly not caused by me. I only wanted to keep our house, keep our joint efforts, yet now I'm turned into a greedy, cruel person destroying my brother-in-law's livelihood. Min Kwan sat in the yard for a long time. He didn't come in to comfort me right away, nor did he rush to call anyone to argue. He just sat on the wooden chair under the betel nut tree, quietly reading over every screenshot, every message, and every post. The yellow light cast upon his face, making his eyes look deeper and colder than usual. I wiped my tears, walked over to his side, and asked softly, "What should we do now?" Min Kwan locked his phone screen, stood up, and looked out into the dark yard, his voice low but chillingly firm. "Fine, if he wants to play big, I'll make sure he has no way back." I froze. In that moment, I understood that the man before me had truly run out of patience. No more letting things slide for my mother, no more speaking lightly because he's a younger brother. From that moment on, our counterattack truly began. On the morning of the third day, when it was still cold and my family hadn't all woken up yet, Min Kwan had already changed his shirt, getting ready to go out. I watched him stand before the mirror adjusting his cuffs, my heart filled with anxiety. Last night he said he would leave Tuan Kiet no way back, but he didn't say exactly what he would do. I stepped closer and asked quietly, "Are you going to see Phuoc?" Min Kwan looked at me through the mirror. His gaze was less angry but much colder and more clear-headed than yesterday. He nodded. "Phuoc and the head of the supervisory board. This matter cannot be allowed to turn into just online posts anymore. It must be brought back to the right documents, the right data." I wanted to go with him, but he told me to stay home with my parents. He said I had been used as a target enough, the rest was his job. Before leaving, Min Kwan turned back to hold my hand, telling me very slowly, "No matter who calls or messages today, do not reply alone. Wait for me to return." I nodded, but as the gate closed behind him, my heart still felt as heavy as if pressed by a stone. I knew from this moment on, everything had gone beyond the scope of a family conflict. It touched on his job, his reputation, and even legal matters. Min Kwan's meeting lasted longer than I expected. It was nearly noon when he finally called home. His voice was deep and to the point. "Dan, the internal audit is conducting an emergency review. There are more serious issues than I thought." I felt my heart tighten. He explained that after comparing the data he provided with Tuan Kiet's payment records, the company found many invoices with signs of suspicious price inflation. There was a shipment of materials initially quoted at over 600 million, but upon checking with the original supplier, the actual price was much lower. The difference had been inflated to nearly double, and the person who signed off on the final files was none other than Tuan Kiet. I sat down in my chair, my hands turning cold. 600 million is not a small amount. It's no longer just about skimming off a few gifts, nor is it the petty greed of an unprofessional businessman, it is calculated intent. Min Kwan continued, his voice heavier, it's not just the invoices. Security footage revealed that some delivered equipment didn't match the codes in the contract. The outer shells were the same, the labels were the same, but the technical codes were different. I didn't fully understand the technicalities, but just hearing that made me uneasy. I asked, does that mean the goods were swapped? He was silent for a second, then replied, yes, lower quality goods. What made me shudder most was that some of those materials had already been installed in areas currently undergoing test operations. If an incident occurred after Tet, the damage wouldn't just be monetary. It could affect the company's timeline, safety, and reputation. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered Dao Mi's excited face when showing off the gifts, and Mrs. Han's voice saying, your brother needs them to give to his partners. Behind those complaints of hardship wasn't a family in need, but a heap of misconduct masked by kinship, tears, and false pride. That afternoon, Min Kwan returned to my parents' house with a weary look on his face. He sat at the table and drained a glass of water before continuing the story. During the meeting, the head of the control board slammed the file on the table, furious enough to state plainly that if this shipment caused an issue, no one in the approval chain would escape responsibility. Min Kwan had to present every single instance where he had previously warned Tuan Kiet. He said that he had spotted some irregularities before but only gave verbal reminders to correct the documents, thinking his brother was inexperienced and deserved a chance. Every time he intended to report it more formally, Mrs. Han would call, crying and saying Kiet was in debt and under pressure. She asked him to respect her and not make a big deal out of it. Hearing that, my father set his teacup down, his voice stern, saying that loving the wrong way is actually harming someone. If you tolerate it once, people will think the rules can be tolerated just the same. Min Kwan lowered his head, offering no rebuttal. He said, I know my mistake was thinking family matters could be kept separate from work, but when he used that leniency to act recklessly, I no longer had the right to remain silent. I looked at him, feeling both pity and anger. Pity because he was dragged into this difficult spot by his own family, and anger because over the years, his soft heart had fueled Tuan Kiet's greed to this extent. At exactly 4 p.m., the company sent out an official notice. All subcontracts with Tuan Kiet's unit were temporarily terminated pending an investigation. All remaining payments were frozen. The file on the violations was handed over to the legal department. If there were signs of intentional fraud, it would be sent to the authorities. Min Kwan read the notice and just quietly put his phone down. I understood that from that moment on, there would be no easy way back for Tuan Kiet. Sure enough, on the evening of the third day, as our family was setting the table, a frantic pounding sounded at the gate, not knocking, but banging with fists. My mother jumped, my father stood up, and Min Kwan stepped out immediately. As I reached the porch, I heard Tuan Kiet screaming outside the gate, Lin Dan, come out here. You want me dead, don't you? Quote, this whole family is ruined because of you. His voice was hoarse, mixed with alcohol and pure desperation. The yard light turned on, revealing his flushed face, bloodshot eyes, and disheveled coat, as if he had driven straight here in a frenzy. My father started to step forward, but Min Kwan raised his hand to stop him. He opened the gate and stood directly in front of me. Tuan Kiet pointed over his shoulder and shouted, look at yourself, ever since you married her, you've completely changed. She instigates you to harm me, and you listen. Do you even consider me your own brother anymore? Min Kwan stood still, his voice cold. If you still considered me your brother, you wouldn't have made up stories to smear my wife. Kiet sneered, but the laugh sounded twisted and mocking. I'm just telling the truth. You and your wife are the ones who drove me into a corner. I couldn't hold back anymore. I stepped forward. Which corner did I drive you into? Did I tell you to inflate the invoices? Did I tell you to skimp on the supplies? Or did I tell you to take my family's things as gifts and get caught? Tuan Kiet lunged forward as if to grab my arm. In the blink of an eye, Min Kwan grabbed his collar and yanked him back. This was the first time I had ever seen my husband this furious. His eyes turned red, and he gritted out each word. If you dare come here to threaten my wife again, I'll put you behind bars myself. Tuan Kiet was stunned. He probably never imagined in his life that the brother who always tolerated him would one day say such a thing. A flicker of fear flashed through his eyes, but it was quickly masked by bitterness. He gritted his teeth. You're doing great, choosing your wife over your brother. You'll regret this. Min Kwan let go of his collar but continued to stand guard in front of me. I only regret covering for you for so long. That sentence made Tuan Kiet fall silent. Inside the house, my mother clutched her chest, breathing heavily. My father was already holding his phone, just waiting for any further aggressive action to call the local police. Tuan Kiet looked at each of us, spat on the ground, and stumbled away. His motorbike engine roared, tearing through the quiet of the early evening. I stood behind Min Kwan, my hands still trembling. He turned back to take my hand. His own hand was cold, but his gaze was very clear. From now on, between him and Tuan Kiet, it is no longer about brothers covering for each other. It is only about right and wrong. And this time, he has chosen to stand on the right side. After Tuan Kiet sped away from my parents' gate, the courtyard remained thick with a heavy silence. My mother sat down, clutching her chest, breathing slowly as if trying to calm herself. My father closed the gate, muttering, "Coming here to cause such a scene at the start of the month. That boy is beyond help." I stood on the porch, my heart still trembling from what had just happened. If Min Kwan hadn't blocked him in time, I don't know what Tuan Kiet might have done in his rage. Min Kwan said nothing. He went inside to wash his face and sat silently by the table. His eyes were fixed on the floor, looking both exhausted and pained. After all, Tuan Kiet is his own brother. As an outsider, I could feel anger or disgust, but for him, it was like being stabbed in the back by his own blood. I placed my hand on his shoulder and said softly, "Don't blame yourself, this isn't your fault." He gave a faint smile. "It's not my fault, but it is the consequence of all the times I chose to stay silent." Before I knew how to respond, my phone suddenly vibrated. A strange number had sent a message to my Zalo. At first, I thought it was someone from my husband's side or a fake account continuing to harass me. But when I opened it, I froze. The sender was Thou Am I. Her profile picture had been changed to black. The message was just one sentence. "Can I meet you just once? I can't take it anymore." I handed the phone to Min Kwan to see. He immediately frowned. After everything Thou Am I had done, from following my mother-in-law to take things to playing the victim online, I really had no trust left. Min Kwan said, "It could be a trap. With Kiet having just caused a scene here, I thought so too. But for some reason, the phrase, 'I can't take it anymore,' made me feel something was different. It didn't sound like her usual fake whining. It was short, urgent, and carried a genuine sense of panic." I replied that if she wanted to meet, it had to be in a public place, not privately. Just seconds later, she replied, "The cafe in front of the district hospital. I'll wait for you in Kwan. Please don't tell Kiet." Min Kwan stared at the message for a moment, then stood up to grab his jacket. He told my father, "I'm taking Dan for a bit, we'll meet in a crowded place. I'll call immediately if anything happens." Quote, my father looked at him sternly, "Be careful. Desperate people are capable of anything." Quote, the coffee shop in front of the hospital was still quite crowded on the evening of the 3rd. People were coming in for drinks, waiting for checkups, or sitting to escape the cold. Min Kwan and I chose a table near the door, with our backs to the wall for better observation. About 10 minutes later, Thou Am I appeared. I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the polished wool dress, the bright red lipstick, and her usual sharp look. She wore an oversized coat, her hair was tied back hastily, her eyes were puffy, and she clutched her handbag to her chest as if afraid someone would snatch it. As soon as she sat down, Thou Am I looked around and burst into tears. It wasn't a sobbing cry to gain sympathy, but one of pure panic, like someone pushed to the edge of a cliff. Min Kwan placed his phone on the table, his voice cold. "Say what you have to say. If you're planning to make things up again, we don't have time." Thou Am I shook her head continuously, her tears falling onto the back of her hands. She choked out, "I've known that Kiet has been taking kickbacks for a long time." That sentence left me stunned. Min Kwan also looked up sharply. Thou Am I bit her lip, her voice trembling as she recounted that for over a year, Tuan Kiet had used supplier names to inflate material prices, falsify expenses, and pocket the difference. At first it was just a few tens of millions, then it grew larger and larger. Every time she asked, Kiet would snap, "What do women know about business? If you don't take risks, how will we ever get ahead?" Quote, she had tried to convince her husband to stop, but Kiet wouldn't listen. He said, "As long as the contract is running and the inspectors turn a blind eye, no one will dig deep." I asked, "If you knew for so long, why speak up now?" Thou Am I lowered her head in silence for a long time, then she said something that made me both angry and pitiful. "Because I was greedy too. At first I thought if he made money, my children and I wouldn't have to suffer. I thought everyone in business takes a few shortcuts. But later I found out he didn't just siphon project funds." She opened her bag, pulled out a stack of photocopied IOUs, and placed them on the table. Kiet took out high-interest loans, played the stock market, bet on soccer, and kept borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. The debt now isn't just a few tens of millions like Mom said, it's nearly $2 billion. A chill ran down my spine as I listened. Nearly 2 billion. So behind Mrs. Han's tears and the excuse that her son was struggling, it wasn't just pride. There was a massive pit of debt. Thou am I continued, her voice so low I had to lean in to hear her clearly. The creditors have already come to the house. They said if they don't get the money after Tet, they'll come to the company, to Mom's house, and even to Kwan's house. Mom was terrified. She told me to take you and your wife's things as gifts first, to secure the contract for KIET, as long as the payment arrived in time. Min Kwan gripped his glass, the veins on his hands standing out. He asked, "Does Mom know about the 2 billion debt?" Thou am I nodded. Tears welled up again. But Mom only thought about saving KIET at any cost. She said Kwan is the eldest and responsible, and since Dan has bonuses, losing a few things wouldn't kill her. Hearing that, my heart went cold. It turns out my kindness in their eyes was never something that needed to be respected. It was just something that could be broken off to fill in someone else's mistakes. But what Thou am I said next truly left Min Kwan and me in shock. She unzipped an inner pocket of her bag and pulled out a silver USB drive, placing it in the center of the table. "I have recordings." Min Kwan looked at her. "Recordings of what?" Thou am I wiped her tears, her voice hoarse. "For months, I've been afraid KIET would dump everything on me, so I secretly recorded his conversations with partners and the people he took money from, even the times he discussed things with Mom." She looked up at us, her eyes red but shining with desperation. "I'm no saint, but I don't want to go to jail with him." Min Kwan plugged the USB into his laptop, and a folder appeared containing dozens of audio files named by date. He tried opening the most recent file. Tuan Kiet's voice rang out, crackling but very clear. "If we get exposed, just pin it on Kwan. He's in charge of technical matters. His signature is on the acceptance chain. He's timid, he won't dare to make a scene. At most, Mom will have a good cry. He'll soften up again." The small table in the middle of the cafe seemed to freeze over. I looked at Min Kwan. His face was pale, but his eyes were bloodshot. Thou am I hung her head, her shoulders trembling. "I'm sorry, I know taking things from your house was wrong. I also know I'm a coward for only speaking up now, but if I didn't bring this out, KIET would drag us all down with him." I looked at the USB drive on the table and suddenly realized the story had taken a different turn. I initially thought I was just seeking justice for the 30 million in Ted goods and my smeared reputation. But those recordings could unravel an entire web of lies and debt. Bribery and framing others had been planned for a long time. Min Kwan pulled out the USB and tucked it into his inner pocket. He looked at Thou am I, his voice ice cold. "From now on, you are not to see KIET alone, nor are you to contact my mother on your own. Tomorrow morning, you will come with us to meet legal counsel." Thou am I nodded repeatedly. I looked at her. I no longer felt the hatred I once had, but I couldn't sympathize just yet either. The woman in front of me was both an accomplice to greed and a witness trying to escape the hole her own family had dug. When we left the cafe, the night wind was blowing bitterly cold. Min Kwan held my hand very tightly. Neither of us said a word. But I knew that after that USB, this battle was no longer just about my in-laws taking their daughter-in-law's Tet items. It had become a real game of chess, one where a single wrong move could drag not only Tuan Kiet down into the abyss, but Min Kwan as well. And me, and the reputation we had both worked so hard to build over the years. That night, after returning from the cafe, neither of us could sleep. The silver USB drive lay on the coffee table, small enough to fit in the palm of a hand, yet it felt as heavy as a stone pressing against my chest. My parents have gone to their room to rest, but I know my mother isn't asleep yet because I can occasionally hear her tossing and turning and a soft cough behind the door. The whole house is submerged in silence. Only Min Kwan and I are sitting opposite each other under the dim yellow light. Min Kwan doesn't play the audio files again. Perhaps hearing them once was painful enough for him. I look at him and see the veins on the back of his hand standing out as he grips his glass of water tightly. People say that men often don't show their hurt. But that doesn't mean they aren't in pain. Tuan Kiet didn't just cheat in his work and smear his reputation. He also prepared a way to push his own brother into the abyss if everything was exposed. That is what has kept Min Kwan silent for so long. The next morning, we didn't give the USB to anyone uninvolved. Min Kwan called Phuoc from the legal department and arranged to meet at the company office, even though it was still the Tet holiday. After hearing the situation, Phuoc simply said to bring the originals, "Don't send them online. This needs to be handled carefully." I went with Min Kwan. Thou Mi was also there, wearing an old coat, no makeup, and with dark circles under her eyes as if she hadn't slept all night. In her hands were a laptop, a bag of documents, and photocopies of the loans she showed us last night. The company office was empty during Tet. The glass doors reflected the three of us walking in, each carrying a different kind of heavy burden. Phuoc was already waiting in the small meeting room, joined by Ha from internal audit. Without any lengthy greetings, Min Kwan placed the USB on the table, his voice husky as he said, "This is the evidence Thou Mi provided, and I request the legal team verify its integrity before using it." Phuoc put on his headphones and opened each file in chronological order. At first, he kept a calm expression, but the more he listened, the heavier his face became. In one recording, Tuan Kiet's voice rang out clearly, discussing with someone about inflating the price of a supply shipment, saying, "Just keep the quote high. The other side won't look too closely. The difference will be split as usual." In another segment, he mentioned swapping goods in a casual tone. "As long as the outside looks the same, it'll be fine. Who has the time to unscrew every single bolt?" I got goosebumps just listening to it. Matters with such serious consequences sounded as trivial to him as exchanging an item at the market. Then came the part that made the whole room go dead silent. Tuan Kiet's voice told Thou Mi that if they were exposed, just blame it on Kwan. He's the one in charge of the project's technical side. His signature is on the inspection reports, and he's too soft and prideful to make a scene. If Mom cries a little, he'll soften up soon enough. I turned to look at Min Kwan. He said nothing, just looked down at the table, his hands clenched until his knuckles turned white. Mr. Phuoc took off his headphones and said in a low voice, "Kwan, this is no longer a family dispute. This is commercial fraud, with signs of forged documents and inflated contract values. If the material swapping is fully verified, we could even refer this to the authorities." Thou Mi began to tremble upon hearing that. She clutched the paper bag tightly, her lips turning pale. Quote, I just wanted to provide the evidence. I'm afraid if Kiet finds out, he'll beat me, or the creditors will come after my children." Ms. Ha looked at Thou Mi for a long time before saying, "If you agree to be a whistleblower, the company can acknowledge it and provide legal support, but you must cooperate fully, hide nothing, and not inform your husband on your own." Thou Mi nodded repeatedly. "I agree. I only ask for one thing. If he comes looking for me, please don't let me meet him alone." That sounded pitifully weak, but I reminded myself. She was the one who helped carry my things away, who stood with my mother-in-law to paint me in a bad light. Pity doesn't erase her wrongs. It only shows that those wrongs are now coming back to haunt her. That afternoon, Tuan Kiet discovered Thou Mi wasn't home and called her repeatedly. At first, Thou Mi hung up, but after Mr. Phuoc's guidance, she put it on speakerphone for us all to hear. As soon as the line connected, Tuan Kiet's voice roared, "Where are you? Where is the laptop? Where is the bag of documents? Do you dare to betray me?" Thou Mi was shaking so hard she almost dropped her phone. Min Kwan signaled for her to stay calm. She took a breath and replied, "I only took what was necessary." Tuan Kiet sneered over the phone. "You think you're clean? Without me, you're just a parasite, living in luxury off the money I earned. Now you turn around and bite me." Thou Mi burst into tears, but this time, she didn't back down. She spoke in a trembling but clear voice. "Am I a parasite, or are you a thief? Let the law answer that." The line went silent for exactly a second, then, Tuan Kiet went berserk. He cursed and threatened to drag my whole family, my parents, and Min Kwan into the mud if he couldn't get away. Less than 10 minutes later, Mrs. Han called Min Kwan. Her voice sounded like a mix of sobbing and scolding, hoarse as if she'd been screaming for days. "Kwan, even if your brother is wrong, he is still your own flesh and blood. Are you really planning to put him in prison? We are family. How can you be so heartless?" Min Kwan closed his eyes. I knew those words cut him deep, but when he opened his eyes, his voice no longer wavered. "I am not sending him to prison. He is walking there himself with everything he has done." Mrs. Han shrieked, "You unfilial son, you listen to your wife, to outsiders, to hurt your own brother. Did I give birth to you just so you could turn your back on your family?" Min Kwan stood up and walked toward the glass window. He spoke slowly, each word heavy as stone. "Being unfilial is not about refusing to cover up a crime. Being unfilial is letting you continue to be wrong without daring to stop you. I have been silent for too long, which is why Kiet thought there would always be someone to pave the way for him." On the other end of the line, There was only a choked sob. Then Mrs. Han hung up. I looked at Min Kwan's back and saw his shoulders trembling slightly. Not out of fear, but out of pain. There are boundaries that, once crossed, make it impossible for people to go back to who they were. Family bonds are the same. Once used as a shield for wrongdoing, they are no longer warm. They become a noose that leaves decent people gasping for air. That evening, just as we arrived at my parents' house, I received a text message from Tuan Kiet's number. It was just a short line. Sister-in-law, if you push me, don't blame me for dragging you down into the mud with me. After I read it, a chill went down my spine. Min Kwan took the phone to look, and his expression darkened instantly. He didn't reply, simply taking a screenshot to save in our evidence folder. But I understood that someone with no way out usually doesn't stop at threats. He would do something more reckless, more underhanded, just to drag us down with him. The next morning, before I could even finish brewing tea for my parents, Min Kwan's phone rang. He looked at the screen, and his face immediately grew grave. The caller was his department manager. The call was very short, but just hearing Min Kwan's responses made my heart tighten. Yes, I understand. I will head to the office right away. No, I have not deleted any data. I agree to pause the project processing for verification. As soon as he hung up, I asked him immediately, "What's going on?" Min Kwan handed me his phone. On the screen was a new post from an anonymous account, but this time it wasn't vague like before. The post named Min Kwan directly, claiming he was the one behind the embezzlement of supplies and taking bribes from suppliers, and that after being exposed, he made up stories to frame his younger brother. Attached to the post was a photo of an envelope of money placed on his desk. Next to it were the nameplates of some project files. I felt cold reading it. The people behind this post were very sophisticated. They didn't use vulgar insults or write like gossiping outsiders. They used a tone that was half accusatory, half analytical, trying to create the impression of clear evidence. Under the photo of the envelope were a few doctored text messages. The content implied that Min Kwan was demanding that the supplier be reasonable, so that the paperwork would be approved quickly. At a glance, anyone unaware of the situation could easily believe it was true. In less than an hour, the post had spread through the company group chat. A few colleagues messaged Min Kwan. Some asked about it, while others silently forwarded it to Duong Lin. That silence was more terrifying than any interrogation. I looked at my husband, seeing him calm, but his jaw was clenched tight. I asked if it was KIET, didn't I? He didn't answer right away, just grabbed the evidence folder, added Dao Mi's USB, and said, "Let's go to the office first." To set a trap, one must also know how to dismantle it. I insisted on going with him. Min Kwan looked as if he wanted to stop me, but then he decided against it. He knew this matter had dragged my name into it from the start. I couldn't just sit at home waiting for others to decide my husband's and my reputation. On the way there, my hands felt freezing cold. If this isn't cleared up quickly, not only will Min Kwan's position be affected, but his entire career, built over years, could be destroyed by a staged envelope and a few fake messages. The meeting room on the morning of the 4th was more crowded than I expected. The department head, Ms. Ha from Internal Audit, Mr. Phuoc from Legal, and 2 board representatives were all present. Min Kwan was asked to suspend his access to certain project files until the investigation is complete. I know it's a necessary procedure, but hearing it said aloud still stung like needles in my heart. Someone who spent months pulling all-nighters to keep the project on schedule now has to sit there like a suspect. The meeting room door opened, and Tuan Kiet walked in. He wore a wrinkled shirt, his hair was messy, and his face was gaunt, looking like a man pushed to exhaustion. But just by looking at his shifty eyes, I knew that appearance was carefully prepared. Walking behind him was Mrs. Han. She started crying the moment she entered, clutching her chest and muttering, "Oh God, brothers from the same family reduced to this." Tuan Kiet sat down opposite Min Kwan, his voice raspy. I admit there were shortcomings in the documentation on my end, but to call me the mastermind is a grave injustice. I only followed what the person with the authority to approve suggested. The department head asked directly, "Who are you referring to?" Tuan Kiet bowed his head for a few seconds, then looked up at Min Kwan, his voice choking, "Kwan, I was wrong for the sake of our brotherhood, but I am not the one who took the money." The room instantly fell silent. I could feel the blood in my veins boiling. Mrs. Han, outside the door, began to wail louder, intentionally making sure everyone heard that Kwan harmed his brother because his wife incited him, and now he is trying to shift all the blame. Quote, "As a mother, my heart is breaking." A few employees standing in the hallway peeked in, curious. Encouraged, She wept even more, as if acting in a play where she was the most miserable mother alive. I couldn't take it anymore. Stepping in front of her, I asked very slowly, quote, "You say I incited Quan to harm Kit. Then who incited you to open my house and take all the Tet supplies?" Mrs. Han froze, her tears stopping for a brief moment, but then she immediately brushed it off, saying family matters can wait, now it's about the brothers harming each other. I looked at her, feeling cold inside. Even now, she still wants to use a smaller wrong to cover a bigger one, using tears to force everyone to forget the truth. Mr. Phuoc finally spoke up. His voice was not loud but very firm, asking everyone to focus on the evidence. The report accused him of having an envelope on Quan's desk. First, checking the office camera for the time period before the photo was taken, Ms. Ha immediately turned on the projector. The camera footage was extracted right there during the meeting. The whole room held their breath, looking at the screen. The beginning showed nothing unusual. Min Quan's desk was empty, with only a file folder and a locked computer. Then, around 7 p.m. yesterday, when the office was nearly empty, someone wearing a helmet, a mask, and a delivery uniform walked in. The person didn't go straight to the reception desk but slipped through the side entrance, went to Min Quan's desk, pulled a yellow envelope from their pocket, and placed it on the corner of the table. He even carefully pulled the file folder closer to take a photo with his phone, then quickly left. The atmosphere in the meeting room changed instantly. Ms. Ha slowed down the video, zooming in on the license plate of the person's vehicle. Mr. Phuoc pulled up the entry and exit data, comparing it with the delivery list from the day before. Just a few minutes later, the name appeared, making Tuan Kit turn pale. That person is Hung, Tuan Kiet's trusted delivery driver, who often transports supplies and documents to the company. The manager turned to Tuan Kit. "How do you explain this?" Tuan Kit swallowed hard, his forehead beginning to bead with sweat. He still tried to remain stubborn. "I don't know. Maybe he did it himself, or maybe it's just a coincidence. A delivery driver has plenty of places to come and go." Phuoc immediately asked, "A coincidence so precise that he placed the envelope on your desk, took a photo, and a few hours later that photo appeared in an accusation post?" Tuan Kit was speechless. Mrs. Han stood frozen, her lips moving but unable to utter a single word. Min Quan had sat still from the beginning, and only now did he slowly stand up. He looked straight at Tuan Kit, no longer with noisy anger or visible pain, only a chilling disappointment. He said each word clearly, "I gave you the chance to be a decent person, not just once, but many times, yet you chose to stab your own brother in the back." Tuan Kit kept his head down, not answering. Standing beside Min Quan, I felt as if the weight on my chest had finally been partially lifted. The trap he set to destroy my husband had begun to unravel. But I knew that for someone who dared to slander their own brother, this silence was not regret. It was just the calm before he tried to struggle one last time. After the footage of the envelope was shown, no one in the meeting room spoke to each other anymore. At first, everyone just thought this was an internal verification session to clarify the accusations against Min Quan. But by the time Tuan Kiet's trusted driver appeared in the recording, everyone understood that the matter had gone much further. Phuoc from the legal department suggested a 10-minute break to include representatives from the board of directors, internal control, and a person from the partner company involved in the secondary acceptance package. The atmosphere in the room was so heavy that I could hear my own heartbeat even while sitting still. 10 minutes later, we were moved to the large conference room. I sat next to Min Quan, my hand on the file Phuoc had just given me, trying to keep myself calm. Opposite me sat Mrs. Han, her face ashen, no longer showing the noisy weeping from earlier. Beside her was Tuan Kit, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. Thou Am sat 2 chairs away from him, clutching a paper bag tightly to her chest. She didn't dare look at her husband, but her gaze no longer seemed as avoidant as before. The board representative opened with a very brief introduction. Today we are holding a confrontation to determine 3 issues. First is the origin of the information accusing Mr. Min Quan. Second are the violations in the subcontracting of Mr. Tuan Kiet's unit. Third is the responsibility of each individual in this chain of events. As soon as the statement ended, Tuan Kit immediately spoke up. His voice feigned an air of grievance. "I am just a small unit forced to play along just to survive. In business nowadays, who doesn't have to play the game? If no one had suggested it, we wouldn't have dared to do it ourselves." I looked at him and felt disgusted. Even at this point, he still wouldn't admit his fault. He didn't say he cheated or swapped goods, just tried to make himself a victim of coercion. Mr. Phuoc, adjusting his glasses, asked, Who forced you? Tuan Kiet glanced at Min Quan and gave a vague answer. I don't want to say it directly out of brotherhood, but everyone understands. How could a small unit like ours dare to deceive the person in charge of technical affairs? Min Quan didn't react, only looked at him with an icy gaze that sent shivers down even my spine. Right at that moment, Thou Mi opened the paper bag, pulled out a stack of documents, and placed them on the table. Her voice was trembling but clear. I would like to provide further evidence. The whole room turned to look. On the table were inflated invoices, a list of high-interest loans, Tuan Kiet's personal transfer history, and several transaction photos. Tuan Kiet immediately jumped up, lunged toward Thou Mi, and shouted, "What are you doing? Give that here." But before he could touch the papers, 2 security guards held him back. A chair was shoved hard against the floor, a harsh sound that made Mrs. Han jump. Thou Mi turned pale but still picked up her phone. She said, "I have a recording. I accept responsibility for having stayed silent, but I cannot continue to let him pin the blame on others." The first recording was played through the conference room speakers, Tuan Kiet's voice ringing out clearly. No one checks closely if the goods are a bit cheap. As long as they look the same on the outside, only losers care about technical codes. The room fell dead silent. The partner company representative sitting at the end of the table immediately looked down to take notes, his expression hardening. Tuan Kiet shouted, "It's edited." She edited it to frame me. Phuoc calmly replied, "The technical department will verify the original file. You don't need to jump to conclusions for them." Then he signaled for Thou Mi to continue. The second recording played. This time it was Mrs. Han's voice. I recognized it immediately. It couldn't be mistaken. Quote, "Just take your brother's stuff to give as gifts first. They have bonuses. There's plenty of money to buy more. The important thing is to keep the connection for Kiet. Our family can't lose face at the start of the year." I turned to look at Mrs. Han. She sat stunned, lips trembling, hands clutching the strap of her bag. I didn't ask her a single question. There was no need. My silence at that moment was heavier than any interrogation. She stammered, quote, I just love my youngest son. I didn't know his business affairs were that serious. I thought it was just social gifting. Everyone gives gifts during Tet." But no one in the room looked at her as an innocent mother anymore. Every word she spoke only made things clearer. She knew she was taking from others to patch up her youngest son's pride. Thou Mi played another recording, and Mrs. Han's voice rang out again. This time it was quieter, but every word was sharp as a knife. Quote, "If there's an issue, just cry to your brother. Quan is very prideful. He won't let the family be shamed. And as for your sister-in-law, a few words from me and she'll be quiet. A daughter-in-law must know how to endure." I saw Min Quan close his eyes, just a single blink. But I understood that sentence had touched the deepest wound in his heart. It turns out that all these years, his kindness and sense of pride were never valued. They were used by his own mother like a button to manipulate him. Min Quan slowly stood up, and the whole room watched him. He didn't look at Tuan Kiet first, but stared straight at Mrs. Han. His voice turned hoarse. "But clearly, all these years you didn't need a son, you just needed someone to clean up your mess." Mrs. Han burst into tears. This time, her crying wasn't loud, nor was she trying to elicit pity like before. It sounded truly belated and helpless. Strangely, no one in the room spoke up to comfort her. When tears have been used too many times to hide wrongs, by the time they are real, people no longer know how to believe them. The management representative concluded at the meeting that all fraudulent records from Tuan Kiet's unit would be sealed and transferred to the legal department to initiate civil litigation to recover damages. If the audit confirms the falsification of material records and personal defamation, the company will hand over the case to the authorities. At the same time, the defamatory post targeting Min Quan will be handled as an act of tarnishing the reputation of company personnel, with a request to trace the source. Tuan Kiet struggled again but was held tight by security. He turned to Thou Mi, his eyes bloodshot. "I sold my soul to support you. I gave you a life of luxury. Now you stab me in front of everyone." Thou Mi looked at him, tears still on her cheeks, but her voice was cold. "No, I just stopped dying in your place." That sentence made Tuan Kiet freeze. As for me, I sat next to Min Quan, my cold hands slowly warming up in his. After so many days of being slandered, blamed, and used as a scapegoat for others' greed, the truth finally had its say. After the confrontation at the company, I thought that no matter how crazy Tuan Kiet was, he would have to feel fear. The evidence was too clear. From the inflated invoices and recordings to the camera footage of him planting the envelope on Min Quan's desk. But perhaps I had forgotten one thing. Someone used to taking shortcuts doesn't wake up immediately when cornered. They just look for another shortcut, one more dangerous, dirtier, and more reckless. That afternoon, while we were still working with Mr. Phuoc to finalize the confrontation report, a compliance officer rushed in. She spoke quietly to Phuoc, but I still caught a few stray words. A copy of the old inspection report is missing from the archive. You were the last one in the archive room. Phuoc's expression changed instantly. He turned to Min Quan. Kiet didn't go home. Security footage shows him leaving the company through the side door with a bag of documents. Min Quan stood up abruptly. What documents? Phuoc opened his laptop, quickly checked the file code, and said, a copy of the old inspection set, containing all parties' signatures on the draft. If it's altered and leaked, it could create the misunderstanding that the project's inspection process was flawed from the start. My heart sank as I listened. So, until the very last minute, Tuan Kiet was still trying to drag the whole project down to save himself. If he can't escape, he will make everyone else a suspect. Less than 5 minutes later, Min Quan's phone pinged with a message. He opened it, read it, and his face turned cold. I was standing next to him and saw the text clearly. If you want peace, withdraw the complaint, otherwise I'll release the fake files and cost both of you your jobs. Don't think I won't do it. No proper punctuation, no brotherly love left, just the recklessness of someone who is bankrupt, disgraced, and has no way out. Min Quan didn't call back. He took a screenshot, sent it to Phuoc, and said, draft a report, notify the legal department, and report this to the police immediately. From now on, I won't handle him privately anymore. That sentence made me feel a little relieved. I was most afraid that he would be soft-hearted, that he would try to negotiate himself for the sake of being brothers and end up falling into another trap. But this time, he was more clear-headed than ever. He understood that for someone who dares to fabricate evidence, any private conversation can be edited and used as a weapon. Near 4 p.m., just as we arrived at my parents' house, a hoarse voice called out from outside the gate. Quote, Dan, come out here and talk to your mother. I froze. That voice was Mrs. Han's. It lacked her usual cold edge and the dramatic crying from previous times. It was dry, broken, and trembling, like someone who had just gone through a genuine panic. My mother walked out from the kitchen first. She opened the gate but not wide, just standing right at the entrance. Mrs. Han stood on the street, her hair disheveled, coat crooked, eyes puffy. The woman who once made me feel pressured just by sitting in my living room was now clutching the iron gate like she was about to collapse. My mother looked at her for a long time and asked, are you here to apologize, or to make my child shoulder more? That question choked Mrs. Han. Her lips quivered, and tears streamed down, but she couldn't utter a word. Then, suddenly, she sank to her knees right in front of the courtyard. I ran out from inside the house, stunned. In all my years as a daughter-in-law, I had never seen Mrs. Han bow to anyone, let alone imagine her kneeling before my mother. She cried as she said, I was wrong. I know I was wrong, sister. I beg you both to tell Quan to withdraw the charges. Save Kiet. If he gets sued, his life is over. My mother did not help her up right away. Her voice remained calm but very stern. Quote, his life is over because he did wrong, but my daughter's life was almost ruined by you people. Did you think of that back then? Mrs. Han covered her face and sobbed. I was obsessed with saving face. I was blindly indulgent toward my youngest son. I thought just taking a few things from his brother and sister-in-law and asking Quan to overlook a few things would be fine. I didn't expect things to get this big. I looked at her, feeling no satisfaction, only a bone-deep exhaustion. I stepped forward and asked softly, are you apologizing because you know you're wrong, or because Kiet is about to pay the price? Mrs. Han looked up at me, her face covered in tears. She did not answer. That silence said it all. If Tuan Kiet hadn't been exposed, if the contract had gone through, if there were no threat of a lawsuit, she probably would still be calling me petty, still forcing Min Quan to endure, and still treating my 30 million worth of Tet goods as nothing. Just then, Min Quan's phone rang. It was Phuoc. He put it on speaker so we could all hear. Phuoc's voice was urgent but clear. Quote, Quan, internal audit just received news that Kiet is meeting a middleman at a cafe near the old bus station. This person has ties to our competitor. There's a high chance Kiet intends to sell or leak fake files to apply pressure. We've notified legal and are coordinating a response, but try calling him to stall for a few minutes. Upon hearing this, Mrs. Han turned pale as a sheet. She staggered and clung to the gate post, muttering, "No, it's impossible, he wouldn't dare." But her voice trembled so much that everyone knew even she didn't believe what she was saying. Min Kwan stood in the middle of the yard, phone in hand, looking off into the distance. I knew the next call to Tuan Kiet would be the final threshold between the two brothers. He dialed the number, it rang for a long time, and finally, Tuan Kiet picked up. His voice was hoarse and cold. "Are you calling to withdraw the complaint?" Min Kwan took a deep breath. "Listen, I'm not withdrawing it, but if you stop now and hand over the files, I'll ask the company to consider your cooperation. But if you sell those files or leak fake documents, you are no brother of mine." My entire yard went silent. Mrs. Han knelt beside him, hands clasped to her chest as if praying with every breath. A cynical laugh echoed from the other end of the line. Tuan Kiet said, "What kind of brotherhood is this? From the moment you chose your wife, I already lost you." Min Kwan closed his eyes. I saw his hand tremble slightly, but his voice remained calm. "No, Kiet, from the moment you chose deception, you lost everything yourself." Tuan Kiet didn't answer, he just hung up. The sharp click sounded dry in the air of the final afternoon of Tet. Upon hearing that, Mrs. Han collapsed in the middle of the yard, sobbing silently. As for Min Kwan, he stood still for a long time, the phone still in his hand. I knew Tuan Kiet's words had severed the last bit of hope in his heart. Some people don't fall because there's no one to pull them back, but because they keep pushing away those who try to save them. And this time, Tuan Kiet had slipped too far. That evening, as dusk fell, Tuan Kiet was detained at a drink stall near the old bus station. Later, I heard Min Kwan tell the story. Everything happened very quickly. The company's legal and security teams had coordinated beforehand, silently tracking the intermediary Kiet was meeting. As he placed the USB drive on the table, he muttered something about how once the documents were leaked at the right moment, the project would fall into chaos, and everyone would swarm in. Tuan Kiet struggled and tried to run, but in the end, he was held back with the bag of documents still in his hand. Inside his bag, besides the altered copies of the acceptance documents, there was a stack of loan agreements, a list of creditors, and a burner phone. That phone was exactly what made everything completely clear. It contained messages he had exchanged with an intermediary, segments discussing how to smear Min Kwan, including details on framing me for embezzling project bonuses. Every line of text appeared cold and stark, leaving no room for any denial. The truth was finally verified. Min Kwan did not take bribes, and I did not embezzle bonuses. The mastermind behind the inflated material costs and the plot to slander his own brother was Tuan Kiet. The company issued an internal notice restoring all of Min Kwan's work authority while assigning him and the legal team to review the project's remediation. But it's strange, reading that notice, I didn't feel as triumphant as I once thought I would. I just felt tired. Those who had messaged me to ask if it was true sent their apologies one after another. Some said they had misunderstood. Others said they were confused because what was written online at the time was so harsh. I replied to them all very briefly. It's okay, everything is clear now. But in my heart, I know that some wounds cannot be healed by just an apology. A person's reputation takes many years to build, yet just a few fabricated lines are enough to cover it in dust. Even though the dust has been wiped away, the stinging sensation in my nose remains. Tuan Kiet is being investigated according to proper procedure. Thou Am I filed for separation, asking to protect her child's interests and continuing to cooperate by providing evidence. I don't know how she will live from here on, and I am not kind-hearted enough to say that I can forgive her right away. But seeing her sit silently with her child in the company hallway, I suddenly realized that in a family where greed is indulged for too long, it's not just outsiders who get hurt. Those within are also pulled in, twisted, and one day must find a way out with all the pain left in them. After the shock, Ms. Han fell ill. Min Kwan took her to the doctor, hired a caregiver, and arranged all her medication, but this time he didn't let me handle it as I always had. He told me, "She is my mother. You don't need to take on more to prove you're a good daughter-in-law." When I heard that, I felt a lump in my throat. Not because I wanted to abandon her, but because after so much, my husband finally understood. Kindness, when forced for too long, is no longer love, it becomes a burden. One afternoon after Tet, Ms. Han called me over. She was lying in bed, noticeably thinner, with more gray hair showing through her faded dye. Seeing me enter, Her gaze was no longer as critical as before. She looked at me for a long time, then said hoarsely, "I'm sorry." All this time, I thought a daughter-in-law had to endure losses to be considered sensible. I stood by the edge of the bed with so much I wanted to say, but in the end, I only replied gently, "I don't need you to love me like a daughter. I only need you not to treat me like an outsider when you want to take, and like family only when you need to pay debts." Ms. Han burst into tears. This time she didn't wail, didn't claim credit, didn't blame anyone, or incite anyone. She just cried quietly, like someone who finally saw the price of favoritism. I don't know if she has truly changed, or if these apologies came too late, but I don't want to hold on to resentment forever. I only know that from now on, boundaries have been set, and no one is allowed to cross them ever again. After Tet, my husband and I changed all the door codes and completely separated our finances from his family's affairs. Min Kwan also made it clear to our relatives that no one may use the family label to interfere with our work or our money. Some say he's too rigid, others say family matters should be handled with more flexibility. He simply replied, "Being gentle doesn't mean letting others do as they please and making my wife suffer for it." A few days later, Min Kwan took me back to my parents' house again. He personally placed a new fruit basket on our family altar, then stood before my parents and bowed his head, saying, "I apologize for letting Dan endure so much unfairness. From now on, I won't let my family mistreat her anymore." My father looked at him for a long time and just nodded. A man doesn't need to speak well, he just needs to do what is right. That simple sentence made Min Kwan go silent, while I turned my face away to quickly wipe my eyes. That evening, he and I sat on the porch of my parents' house. The last pot of banh chung was still simmering on the wood stove. The scent of smoke, phrynium leaves, and sticky rice mingled together. It was strangely peaceful. I leaned my head on Min Kwan's shoulder, looking at the small courtyard after the storm. The 30 million spent on Tet that was lost, looking back, was just money. What would have been more terrifying was if, that day, as I stood in the empty kitchen, my husband had told me to endure it like every other time. Luckily, this time he chose to stand on the right side. Not just standing with me because I am his wife, but standing for what is right. The side of minimal respect between those who call each other family. And from that Tet onwards, I understood something very light yet very profound. Family is not a place where the strong have the right to take and the gentle have to endure. Family is a place where people know how to set boundaries, know when to stop before hurting each other, and know that affection without respect will sooner or later just become an excuse to make each other miserable. As for those accustomed to living by greed and pride, sometimes no one needs to take revenge on them. What they have done will one day come back to find them. Fully and fairly, without missing a single penny.